No bullshit reviews. Today on No BS Reviews, we're going to be talking about none other than the IS-3. This is the predecessor to the IS-2, and it has a lot of unique features over the IS-2. That being said, in real life, it was a historical mess. I mean, not a mess, but it had less gun depression than its predecessor, less headroom inside the turret for its crew members, and the hull sometimes split apart. Regardless, it featured some pre-angled armor, known as the pike nose, which was seen on later variants of Joseph Stalin tanks, along with this tank itself. So, to dig into how it performs into War Thunder, we're going to start with the armor. Pre-angled, what could go wrong? Armor, it's what makes a heavy tank, correct? So this thing boasts pretty good armor. Now, I mentioned earlier that it has a pike nose. This means that both armor plates are angled at a point in the middle of the chassis if you're looking at the front of the tank. This prevents the tank from having to angle. For example, a Tiger 1 would have to angle. It has a flat piece of armor. So if you turn the hull to the side, you now create better effective thickness. This is the Soviets' main idea when making this tank was, let's just pre-angle the armor so whatever you're looking at has trouble penning it. Now in War Thunder, it is good armor, but at the battle rating it sits at 7.3, this tank is kind of a lost king. I guess you could say it's fallen from its former glory. Back in the day, World War II tanks were the only tanks that we could see in War Thunder. Now, this tank was designed in 1944, never saw combat in World War II, but it was marched through Berlin in the parade because it was done in time. Now, whether or not they rushed that, completely out of the question, doesn't matter. It didn't fight in World War II, so this was a tank that was one of War Thunder's old top-tier meta tanks, along with the IS-4M. Now, in War Thunder, it's kind of fallen because all the tanks around it can penetrate this armor. It looks very squishy to an Ontos, very squishy to an RU-251, and those tanks are, what, 0.7 BR lower than this tank itself. It sits at 7.3. On top of that, we'll get into some of the other things later on down the line which make it very susceptible to being killed. But currently the armor is not a strong suit for this tank, and considering it's a heavy tank and that's probably one of the main reasons you're going to pick this thing up, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, given that the IS-3 is a heavy tank with a lot of armor and a big gun with a long reload, you'd think that the mobility on this thing would lack. But it's actually pretty quick for a heavy tank. Not the fastest thing you've seen on tracks, but it can get around the battlefield. It can get around the battlefield in a good amount of time, and it doesn't really have too much trouble doing so. Where you notice this thing starts to slow down is obviously when you have to neutral turn on a hill or some type of incline. Basically normal heavy tank stuff. This thing has a 500 and something horsepower engine that can move this strong stellinium tank at about 40 kph as given by the stat card. Realistically, you probably won't see anything over 35 to 38 kilometers an hour, but it's still pretty fast for a tank of this size and nature. That being said, you won't be able to rush into any cap zones really, or rush into any particular spot fast enough. And even if you can rush to a spot, good luck using the awesome gun depression this tank has. Now, in typical Soviet fashion, they slapped this thing with a 122mm D25 cannon. This thing's a very good gun. Very, very good gun. Now, you get a choice of 4 ammo types, including HE. Never use HE. Don't be that guy. But the other ammo types are the BR-471, BR-471B, and BR-471D. Now, the D round has the best pen of all three, but it has a lower TNT equivalent inside the shell itself. I tend to use the D, and the D round is what I'm using now because I enjoy giving out D. How many times do I have to say D? But if you want the most bang for your buck, I would suggest trying out the B round. It still has a lot of pen, 205 millimeters, about that. So if you're able to penetrate whatever armor, you do have a little bit extra TNT. I think it's about 25 grams of explosive, or 0.25 extra. I don't really know the gauging for that. but you have a little bit more to go through. Now, obviously, the 120 millimeter, 122 millimeter does not get reloaded fast, especially because every time Ivan reaches in the back for another shell, he bangs his head on top and has to be concussed for about 5 seconds until Yuri gives him another shot of vodka and helps him slam that shell straight into that gun breech. But while you're dealing with that, the gun itself also has a couple of issues. There's a huge weak spot. Now, maybe I should have mentioned this in the armor category, but it more so has to do with the gun. The only thing on top of the gun is a 20 millimeter breech plate, type of plate that's just sitting on top of the breech, and that's it. So if you have to shoot this thing and it's at a little bit of an incline facing downward towards you, so you're not facing up towards it, you're facing down towards it, you can go through the top of the turret by overmatching. So the gun is so big, they couldn't put any more armor above it, and on top of the fact that the gun is so big, it cannot depress as much as the IS-2. While something like the IS-2 might have -4, -5 gun depression, I'm not too sure. Again, I'm speaking off of memory, and my memory's thin these days. This thing has even less. I'd be surprised if this has like -1. I don't care what the stat card says. You can't go over a hill and shoot at anything. You have to be completely level or looking down at them to even get a shot on them. So on top of the decent mobility and armor that has been outclassed by newer, lighter vehicles that shoot rounds that don't care about your armor, you also have to deal with a long reload and no gun depression, and I mean none. This thing is the saddest of the sad boys when it comes to Russian heavy tanks, and it's just kind of real sad to see. You hate to see it, man. The end of the story is, do you like memeing? If you're a memer, if you enjoy Soviet tanks and you like looking at iconic tanks from history, this is probably a tank for you. If you're a completionist and you want to go through the whole tree without missing anything, definitely pick up the IS-3. Is it completely inadequate on the battlefield? No. Can you get kills? Yes. But is it worth it? No. And this is more of an issue with War Thunder itself and not the tank itself. There's very little situations where this tank is viable in War Thunder because of the new tanks that have been added. Now, usually I'm a sim guy and I would say, hey, check out sim, maybe play some sim with this tank, but it's a heavy tank. And if you're new to sim and you don't understand what heavy tank means in sim, it means you get 1 spawn as opposed to 2. And 1 spawn as opposed to 2 is 1 screw up, you won't be able to spawn again. And, you know, no one wants that. No one wants to be that upset about the game. As a backup at a 7-3 lineup, I mean, maybe, but there's not very other tanks at 7-3. This is just one of those things that is kind of lost in history. Now, seeing as how the Jagdtiger had the ability to go down to 6-7, I don't see why the IS-3 doesn't have that ability either. I think all it's going to take is a couple angry Soviet fanboys to get on the forums, so get your keyboards out, guys. And that's probably the only way we'll see this thing actually become a viable asset to War Thunder anymore. Tanks like the FV-4202 at 6.7 have a faster reload and a stabilizer, shooting higher pen rounds, while tanks like the M50 Ontos for America are at a lower BR, have 6 guns that can all kill you in 1 shot. It gets 6 guns. I don't know if you know about the Ontos. Maybe we'll cover it in a no BS review one day. But final verdict on the IS-3 is it's a lot too little. Kind of like its real life story. It's a lot too little. This is kind of the epitome of heavy tank design towards the end of World War II. Everybody was pushing for heavier tanks, bigger tanks. They thought that more armor meant less vulnerability and that the tank would have more success on the battlefield. Whereas we know nowadays that less armor, higher engines, faster mobility, and more points on crew survivability and crew well-being are more important on the battlefield. Take a look at any of the new modern MBTs. Their loaders don't have to worry about hitting their heads on any commander hatches and have Yuri resuscitate them with the vodka shot immediately. Whereas some of the earlier designed heavy tanks for Russia, some of the later designed heavy tanks for Russia, and even some of their early MBTs focused very little on crew well-being. And it's a big factor on the battlefield. Although that doesn't really matter in War Thunder too much. This tank is just too slow, not strong enough, and not fast enough to deal with the rapid, ever-changing environment in War Thunder. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Again, please leave me some criticism in the comment section down below and tell me how I could do these videos better. As always, it's been your boy Slick. If you enjoyed this, leave a like on it. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're new around here. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace, peace. Oh, actually, hold on. Hold on. Did I make a point in this video? Or what? Look at that Ontos. Did you see that Ontos? Yeah. You can get a good game in the IS-3, but you can also have a lot of bad games in the IS-3. And on that note, have a wonderful day.